Thereby undermining the actual happenings, the actual events. But I would like to know from you, as a listener as well, the Chief Whip, Matola Motshekga, called it a dilution of history. But with the definitions that have been given, give me your opinion as a young person. Was it justifiable, or do we really need to look at and re-look at new terms? Give me your opinion on there, or even tweet us. We'll be able to take in your Twitter comments and read them out, and email us as well, and we'll be able to address all of those questions as well as comments. Now, before the break, lovely gentleman in the grey there from Freedom Park was giving us his opinion this evening. So you can continue from where you left.
Thank you, Faith, and your listeners. Just a quick one. Thank you, Dr. Badate, for illustrating the distinction between bannings and the banishments. Because this makes me to recall certain incidents in the past during the apartheid era, before the Born Free State here came around. Briefly, I remember when we were warned via media not to read a particular book, it's banned. Not to listen to a particular song, it is banned. And then alongside this understanding, I read a book on Mama Winnie Mandela on her banishment to run for in the Orange Free State. I just wanted to allude to your explanation that one at this point in time feels very happy to be able to use these terms appropriately. But I also want to try and find out why you don't have your traveling exhibition here, whether it is in the foundation. Thank you very much. Please remember, the Freedom Park is in Pretoria. It's going to be.
I'm sure we're all aware of that. Would you like to address that question, Dr. Slick?
Look, all three people who have raised questions now, I have a great empathy, and I think what they are perhaps really talking about is an estrangement, an alienation on parts of the youth, and one's not surprised. Given Nkandla, given Marikana, given many things that are happening in the society, I'm more and more empathetic to perhaps thinking about, and with the last example of banning of newspapers, banning of this, it's so many people today who made important contributions to the liberation struggle until very recently are now being treated as counter-revolutionaries, as renegades. It's almost as if you critique anyone in power, somehow you must be isolated, you must be marginalized. Maybe those are forms of banishment and banning and so on. And I think all three people are speaking about perhaps experiences, a feeling of estrangement from the body politic, from the social and political life of our country. And we must take that very seriously, because these are the people who are going to inherit this country. And if they're feeling like that, perhaps we need to rework these notions of banning and banishment and so on. But without doing injustice and violence to what were the bannings under the apartheid period and the detentions and the banishment and so on.
I've got Sibongile from Bryanston on the line. Sibongile, good evening. Thank you very much for joining us.
Hi, Faith.
Hi.
I've been listening to you guys talking, and I must say that I'm really hurt because I have been dating my boyfriend. He's a white guy, and we've been together for 5 years. And the moment that he introduced me to his family, he was completely disowned. His family just disregarded him, and we had to move because of that. We had to end up moving to Johannesburg to start a life together, and I've been hurt because I can't get to know my boyfriend's family because of that, and it really hurts me a lot. I mean, it has to be some form of banishment still.
as we were saying before, modern day. Thank you very much for your call, Sibongile. But Ms. Sulu, when we're looking at banishment, and as she was saying that she, in her opinion, that is a form of banishment. You know, as a young person, that's her reality. What can you say to that? What do we do in that circumstance? You were raised in a family which underwent certain circumstances, not to take away from your experiences, but in hers, this is her reality at this moment. This is her definition of banishment.
I think it's important to note that is, because that's what preoccupies her now. You know, that's her day-to-day life, and it's important that we note that and make sure that, you know, she's actually, it may very well be that now that can be attended to in a public platform like this. And perhaps we need to commend the Steve Biko Foundation as well as YFM for providing the platform for that kind of a dialogue. Now, the difference is that when people were banned and banished, it was the Suppression of Communism Act of 1951. It was legislated by law that happens. This is not legislated. It's not to make light of it. It's to say that the family has made a choice, and it's unfortunate because now they're affecting the daughter, the girlfriend, and the son, you know, and that will have different consequences in our society. But that is actually saying we're moving in a different direction. And I do appreciate the questions that were asked earlier, you know, to say, but we also then need to ask the question of what is our responsibility. I think when Nkosinathi Biko was speaking earlier, was saying that black professionals can also then use these kinds of platforms. So if maybe Julius Malema is just a bit too rowdy, well, certainly you can then come to sort of, you know, prep it all up and make your opinions heard so that you're not feeling as marginalized. And maybe these platforms are just but a beginning, you know, but how do you enter the broader space? YFM as a radio station begins to provide you that platform. But you also want to make sure that your voice is heard towards changing. And that's the beauty of South Africa today, is that what we do and what we say, unlike developed countries, has an opportunity to make a meaningful difference and an impact today, tomorrow, and in years to come. So we must take very seriously our opinions, our discourse, and our disagreements, you know, while not diluting the difficulties and the psychological effects, the emotional effects of what banishment and banning did back in 1951 going forward.
I've got another question from the audience.
Thank you. Zanokolo Futwa. I believe that it's a very difficult comparison. Banishment and banning as was experienced under the apartheid environment and today. Purely because we are in today's time supposed to be living under the environment of freedom. However, I just wanted to raise a concern of some of the ironies that are working in my mind now about the fact that we're living in a says there are certain rights guaranteed to me today which have been fought for by the very same people that have shared experience with us. However, the thought of experiences of us today, young black professionals, unable to add value to society as a result of systematic mind banishment from participating in the economy, as well as, for example, issues like when, as a young child, your right to education is taken away by a systematic process that allows certain people, for example, to be able to act or to exercise their rights at the expense of your ability to access education, which is a right, and your ability to participate in the economy in the future, which is deferred as a result of that consequence. Thanks.
Mr. Rachidi, what would you like to say to that statement that was made by the gentleman? If you can kindly use your microphone.
Anyway, I still think what does not dilute the issue that in banning, there was an act that said you are banned, and these are the underlying factors that are actually going along with the banning order. Now, I think some of the things that are happening today, like we have been saying, I think it's important that we must try to look for other words that can describe them. But I don't think in any way they can actually be equated or compared with with banning and banishment.
Dr. Salim.
Fred, I must tell you, the last caller with the very sad reality of being banished because of a particular love affair, and the example that has just been provided now usefully reminds me that perhaps we should make a distinction, which I do make in the book, between political bannings and banishment and other kinds of bannings and banishments. I think the gentleman is quite right. We may not be dramatic to say the dismal state of schooling in this country is banishing millions of kids from any effective participation as citizens of this country. We must say that. Now, so perhaps we need to make this distinction between other kinds of banishment. For example, as I say in the book, Adam and Eve were banished for misbehaving. In Jewish communities historically, people have been banished for violation of social norms and customs and so on. Today, Native Americans banish people for violation of certain social customs and so on. So this example that was provided to us by the last caller,
Yes.
maybe that's a kind of banishment. It's not political banishment, but it's another kind of banishment. And so perhaps we have to be creative and, without doing violence to our history, make a distinction between banishments and bannings and so on that were of a political nature, and those are of a different nature. And maybe those are coming to the fore today.
Because we're going to talk about how is it that we formulate a synergy, link up between the older generation as well as the new generation, and how is it that we can share our experiences and learn from each other. But I believe that we do have a question from the audience. Yes.
Hi, my name is Timothy Maurice Webster. And as an author around sociological dynamics, I want to submit a term, and feel free to just take it off the table if it's not relevant. But how about the banned or banishment effect? When you think about like Prince Harry, he lives and enjoys the royalty effect. His great-great-grandparents enjoyed a number of success and modeled an economy to benefit him. The Jewish community, as you stated, Doctor, is the community are very clear about the Holocaust effect. Confucius was very clear about what it takes 7 generations to produce a refined gentleman. He called it the Chauncey effect. So I think we should model, we look closely at the sociological impact around the ban or banishment effect and sort of model the different spheres from education, economics, workplace dynamics, and maybe there's 4 or 5 key pillars that the being banned or being banished impacted our society.
Timothy speaking about the banishment effect. Perhaps we need to start formulating new terminology in order for us young people to sort of identify with it. More in contemporary banning, modern day banning, etc. But when we come back, I'm going to ask for the opinions of Dr. Salim Padat as well as Mam Ntsiki on that concept. Be back straight after this. And you are still joining us for the second Frank Talk Radio Dialogue as we are broadcasting live from our YFM studios. Just before the break, we were discussing new terminology, and Dr. Padat was speaking, of course, about establishing the difference, and Timothy then came on to say perhaps we need to formulate a new concept called the banning effect. Mr. Rachidi, what would you say to that? Perhaps is it about time now that we formulate new terminology and maybe even adopt this new concept?
I would definitely agree with that. I think that is probably the way to go. Because really you can't keep on just saying that this is like that when it's not like that.
Yes.
I think formulating new ways and terminology will probably be the best possible approach.
Now, also, Dr. Padat, when we are looking at an apartheid area, the enemy was clearly defined. There was the enemy. And now looking in modern day times, should we say that the enemy is corruption? The enemy, as you so said, our children are being banished from receiving a proper right to education, a proper education that will allow them to interact globally with their peers. Those are examples of perhaps new enemies that we need to identify and new struggles that we need to overcome. how then do we then, link up, and how then do we utilize tools, and what do we do in order to rid us of this enemy, this new enemy of the lack of education, this new enemy of unemployment, this new enemy of corruption, which causes us as a nation really to be banished from experiencing and from achieving our full potential?
I think it's absolutely right. My generation had it much easier because there was a clearly defined enemy. That was apartheid. I think the current generation of youth have a much tougher job because some of those enemies that you mentioned are long-standing historically and enduring, and they've almost become natural. Like poverty is natural, like unemployment is natural, like working class people and rural poor people always being denied good education is natural. That's the way the world is. Right? And so many of us internalize that kind of way of thinking. The rich man at his castle, the poor man at his gate. All the messages we get in our society are naturalizing things that we should be making strange and not be accepting as natural. So I think absolutely young people today have a much tougher job, and that's why I think we should be admiring young people, especially when they are speaking the way they are, when they're taking part in equal education and demanding education rights. The youth of this country are not personified by Julius Malema and his crowd. The youth of this country are personified by thousands of other people in this society who are doing wonderful work and are unsung heroes and heroines in this country. So I'm very sympathetic. I think this is the beauty of a program like this, to hear these youth voices that are saying, I'm feeling alienated, I'm feeling estranged, I'm feeling banished, I'm feeling banned, and so on. So before we ban the word banning, and before we banish the word banishment, I think perhaps we need to make a distinguish between the political forms that existed under apartheid and perhaps the new forms that are starting to emerge post-1994.
Now, unfortunately, we are running out of time, but I'm going to ask you, Ms. Sulu, when it comes to the youth, what can the youth learn from the memory of Black Wednesday, and especially as custodians of the South African democracy?
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. With the new enemy being corruption, remember that as South Africans, we all have an obligation, if not a duty, or to be patriotic and responsible in terms of what we do and how we engage.
Yes.
A public servant may be held to a higher moral standard not to engage in corruption, but so too is the person in the private sector held to a moral standard that is high enough because they're a South African not to make an advance. Yes. So we both have an equal responsibility in that sense. And the third party is the one who is silent and will look on and say nothing and do nothing, but then we will then complain wherever we are. So as young people, we do need to stand up, we do need to be heard. And when I wanted to end where I started, is to say, I wonder how many of us, whether in leadership or not, can say what Walter Sisulu said when he was sentenced, when he thought he was going to the gallows. He said, I will go singing, because for those who follow me, I want them to know as young people that we have fulfilled our task. I don't know how many leaders today can say they will leave leadership because they fulfilled their task. And as young people following them, are there any who can follow in those steps?
Mr. Kenya Rashidi, as an individual who, as a former leader of a band organization, the Black People's Convention, what do you say to the young South African today, dealing with the various realities that we're facing, the new enemy as being defined, corruption, lack of education, unemployment? What hope can you give us?
What I can say is that I've said before that we didn't want to police ourselves. And also that we must make sure that we look for all possible avenues to make things better. It's a big challenge, but this rests on us in terms of what is happening now needs to be corrected by somebody sometimes in the future. And we have that responsibility to face. I believe that if we start looking and discouraging others who probably are taking advantage of this economic, this freedom that we have now, in terms of enriching themselves, in terms of making sure that other people don't get opportunities, I think the more we try and make sure that we work against that, I think that is actually the way to go. Because we can't just look at them doing things the way the things are going on now.
And Dr. Salim, when we're looking at the book, Banished People, The Forgotten People, actually, tell us about the inspiration behind this title. It's quite a powerful title that you provided there, and of course you were making a lot of reference to it during our conversation, but first of all, the inspiration of this book in the first place.
Very quickly, in 1982, I was doing research for a master's on the forced removal of 3 million black South Africans in terms of Group Areas Act and the creation of Bantustans. I came across the word banishment. That led me to Helen Joseph's book, Tomorrow's Sun, that was banned in South Africa. In those days, you had to go and sit in a special room at the University of Cape Town Library. No one else could be with you when you were reading that book. It took me to Norwood, to Helen Joseph's front garden, and as they say, the rest is history. I made a promise 30 years ago to publish a book one day on banishment, because it's virtually unknown in South Africa. And the double motivation is that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, amongst all the good work it did, also had unfortunate silences and omissions. Only 14 people out of the 160 that were banished feature in Volume 7, which records those South Africans whose human rights were violated. And so these people were called the forgotten people, the people who had been condemned by the apartheid government and then really forgotten by the ANC in the 1950s until Helen Joseph, Lillian Ngoyi, Amina Kachalia, and then began to bring their plight to the public. And then the TRC forgot these people. In fact, the 2 men who are still alive of the 160 today have not received any special pensions and reparations like other liberation movement fighters. And the bigger point that I'm trying to make in this book, that the vast majority of these people are rural people. And by and large, we have completely marginalized and forgotten the wonderful histories of the contributions that rural people have made to the liberation struggle in this country. All the heroes and heroines, as far as I see, are urban people. And I'm not denying their contribution, but how about speaking about the contributions of Chief Mopeli, Mokoena Matlala, Theophilus Shangela, Solomon Madikizela, and all those kinds of other people. And so I'm hoping to inspire through this book many masters and PhD theses on these wonderful men and women who need to be brought out of the state of being forgotten in South Africa.
And it is with that we bid you farewell when it comes to our second Frank Talk Radio Dialogue. This has been a live broadcast coming from you and coming straight to you from the YFM studios. We thank you very much for joining us this evening, and a thank you to our panelists, Mr. Kenny Rachidi, who is the former leader of the band organization, the Black People's Convention, Dr. Salim Badat, who is the author of The Forgotten People, Political Banishment Under Apartheid, and Mrs. Ntsiki Sisulu Singapi, granddaughter to Walter and Albertina Sisulu. Thank you very much for joining us. And thank you to the listener for spending time and taking time out to listen and learn something about our history, lest we forget. Until next time, join us again. Thank you very much for joining us, and good night.